Apamada's programs and facilities are supported through your generosity. Your support really does make a huge difference. You'll find a link for contributions on the website at apamada.org/contribute. Thank you so much.
Good day. Today's Dharma talk is inspired by the service that was held yesterday morning in Austin in celebration of the life of Carolyn Miles, our Sangha member. And since I know for folks online weren't necessarily able to be in Austin, and some of us here were there, and some of our sisters were there, and some of us weren't there, I wanted to just sort of continue what Flint offered in person at Carolyn's service. And so I'll begin at the beginning. Great is the matter of birth and death, quickly passing, gone, gone. Awaken, each one, awaken. Don't waste this life. It's a slightly different version of the verse of the Han that Joan will recite later this morning, and that is said every morning at monasteries all around the world in all the languages. But don't waste this life. Okay, well, that sounds good, but how do we not waste this life? You know, that sounds daunting. And I think yesterday, considering Carolyn's life, I think we got some clues about how one might not waste this life. And so Flint reminded us of a few things. I guess first, briefly, I'll let you know I'm going to speak for just a couple of minutes, and then I'm going to invite you to do some writing on your own. So if you don't have something to write on, you might want to just know where you're going to get it in a few minutes. And then we'll be in pairs, either sharing what we wrote or sharing our reflections and listening. Then we'll come back as a group. So the service yesterday was at a park in Austin that's actually right in the center of town, but it's a sculpture garden. It's small, it's wooded, and thankfully it was cloudy and breezy and actually quite pleasant to be outside. So thank you, Carolyn. There were, I would guess, about 150 or so people there, and quite a number of Sangha members, probably 15 or 20, I would say, and then people from all different parts of Carolyn's life. And so one thing that Flint offered was these simple reminders. This is not new information, and yet so easy to forget. Again, the idea being of like, how do we don't waste this life? How do we live a not wasted life? How do we live an awakened life? So Flint reminded us that our practice of meditation is simply pausing. We make it complicated, but it's really just hitting the pause button. And in that pausing, we experience the present. For me this morning, making plans about what I'm going to eat after this, and then, silence and being together. All the things, my leg falling asleep, for all of us, there's so much that's present, thoughts, physical sensations, stories. That being present to what is wisdom, Flint reminded us. It's easy to think that wisdom is something like either up here or out there somewhere, like I'm going to get it. And the wisdom is really just observing what's true when we pause. And then through this pausing that we do, we gain the ability, and I think the word I would use is endurance, to turn toward suffering, both our own and those of others. And that turning toward suffering, as opposed to like running away from it, is compassion. And that leads to connection. And in Flint's typical wonderful way, he said, I think I quote directly, in other words, we can't do this alone. And relating to Carolyn's death, that people speaking briefly, is that Carolyn was a person who had, among many talents, a talent for maintaining relationships from different parts of her life. And I wish that they had kind of, asked people to raise their hands, like who's from high school, who's from college, who's from graduate school, who's from fundraising, who's from, therapy world, who's from Shambhala, who's from Appamada, who's from family, etc. But they didn't do that. But it was clear that people from all of those parts of her life, and probably some other ones I don't know about, were there. And that her mother really pointed to Carolyn's ability to stay, her priority to stay connected to people that she cared about throughout all of her life. And her mother, I heard her say it was a little hard. There was a little babbling brook nearby, I should mention that. It was hard for me to hear her mother, who spoke quietly, but I felt like I heard her mother say that her mom, whose name is Betty, said, I have friends from different parts of my life, but I haven't kept in touch with them. And so that she really remarked on that ability of her daughter, and that really came so clear when Carolyn became sick, I think about 4 years ago. So the other thing I'll share so that's a very, very brief summary of what Flint offered yesterday morning. The other thing I'll mention is that, so there are these sculptures and trees and the little babbling brook. And then this is right in the middle of town. So there's also airplane traffic sounds just on the other side of the fence. And a little green lizard on the top of the pergola that was sheltering, kind of creating shade if it had been sunny, over where Flint was. So basically over Flint's head, there was this little green lizard, and they're all around the South. I don't know if you have them up north and in other places, but they're called green anoles. People often call them chameleons because they can turn either green or brown depending on their surroundings. But they're not really chameleons. They're apparently actually lizards. It's a whole different species. So they're green anoles. And this one, the males, have what's called a dewlap, so like some extra skin. They're not very big. I mean, they're really small creatures, but very, very, very bright green, which is why you can see this one, because he was not on a green surface. And the males have this dewlap that they can inflate, and it's bright pink. And so this anole was doing this above Flint's head and sort of back and forth during much of the service. And so, so all beings were there, the cars, the traffic, the airplane going over, and us, we were all there together. And the anole. And a couple of things that made the service special is that Carolyn had a hand, quite a strong hand, I would say, in planning her service, down to foods that were served, which she had mentioned to me that she was looking at caterers for her service a couple weeks before she died. And that meant that she chose a poem, and she also asked a friend to choose and read a poem. And so we're gonna read one of those poems, and you guys here have copies inside here. It's the poem that this talk is named for, Accepting This, by Mark Nepo. And I apologize that I didn't get a chance to check. Carolyn had told me that she wanted Clayton to pick a poem, and Clayton talked to me about, like, how am I gonna know which poem? And I said, you'll know. And then Jessica would read it because Clayton is out of the country right now. But I don't know, it's possible that Jessica chose the poem. I'm sorry, I don't know for sure. But anyway, either Jessica or Clayton chose this poem with Carolyn in mind and in response to her request that's called Accepting This. And I'll read this one. Accepting This. Yes, it is true. I confess, I have thought great thoughts and sung great songs, all of it rehearsal for the majesty of being held. The dream is awakened when thinking I love you, and life begins when saying I love you, and joy moves like blood when embracing others with love. My efforts now turn from trying to outrun suffering to accepting love wherever I can find it. Stripped of causes and plans and things to strive for, I have discovered everything I could need or ask for is right here in flawed abundance. We cannot eliminate hunger, but we can feed each other. We cannot eliminate loneliness, but we can hold each other. We cannot eliminate pain, but we can live a life of compassion. Ultimately, we are small living things awakened in the stream, not gods who carve out rivers. Like human fish, we are asked to experience meaning in the life that moves through the gill of our heart. There is nothing to do and nowhere to go. Accepting this, we can do everything and go anywhere. The line of this poem that Flint sort of called out after Jessica read it so beautifully is, my efforts now turn from trying to outrun suffering to accepting love wherever I can find it. And I think that is, for me, the answer to that question of how do you not waste this life? That we turn our efforts from trying to outrun suffering to accepting love wherever we can find it. And so today, I'm going to invite you. I think often our culture, there's no doubt our culture is so individualistic. I was reading, the New York Times has an interview with the academic author who wrote a book, I guess 30, 40 years ago now, called Bowling Alone, and about the need for community and how much of what he sort of anticipated in American culture anyway, has come to pass, especially with the pandemic, of our highly individualistic culture just becoming more and more isolated from one another. And a last thing I'll share before I give you your assignment is, I didn't know this, I guess it was Carolyn's father who, as I recall her saying, and this seemed true meeting him, I'm like 99% sure, was in the military. So like a pretty, upright kind of fellow, and definitely heartbroken losing his daughter. But he mentioned that one Christmas, he was so surprised that some friends came to Carolyn and her son Miles' home and decorated the house for Christmas. And it touched him so deeply. So again, this idea of accepting love where we can find it. Our assignment is this: to take some time. You'll have about 10 minutes, but you can continue this later, to reflect on people or non-human beings in which you have found love and accepted it. So it's like a two-part thing. Someone offers the love and then you have to let it in. Some of us aren't so good at that second part. This could be a list. If you're a list maker, you could list people. You could start at the beginning of your life to now, Or it could be that one being comes to mind and you could write them a letter. I'll remind us that in Buddhist tradition, at a memorial service, Flint did what is typically done of speaking instead of about someone in the third person, spoke directly to Carolyn. And so this is a way to kind of write a letter to someone that has offered you love and that you've accepted it. So the assignment is thinking of those people, either making a list or settling on one or two people, writing them directly. Dear so-and-so, I'm thinking of how much you love me and how I was able to accept that love. And you can include people who have gone before into the great unknown. And really importantly, I would like you to observe, how did you experience this sensation of being loved and accepting love? And how did you know that this person or being loved you? And how do you know you were accepting the love? No way to do this assignment wrong. And so let's go ahead and start 10 minutes just of alone time. You can go off screen if you like, and that would have us come back at, let's say, 35 after the hour.
Could you again talk about the second part? How did we experience love being offered?
Yeah, how do you know that you received love? Like, what's the felt sense or the observation, the data? How is it that you are calling yourself to put this person down as someone who offered you love and you accepted it? How do you know that? What was the experience? Could be specific, like I was sick and they, my mother rubbed my forehead, or it could be the action that was taken, like the decorating the house for Christmas, or it could be just a more general, I felt seen. They listened to me. And so what I'd like you to do now is and I'm changing the time slightly, just shortening it, Marla. 5 minutes, it'll be 15 minutes total. 5 minutes for one of you to share. You can share what you wrote. You don't have to. You can share your observations about the exercise. And yeah. And then the other person will just listen. No feedback, no anything. At the end of the 5 minutes, you can say thank you or bow and then switch, again, listening. And then for the last 5 minutes, the two of you can converse freely and you can reflect on how it felt to hear about whatever was shared, or how it felt to share about your experience. Clear?
How many minutes total?
Total 15.
Okay.
Hello, so we're just coming back together here in the Zendo. So we have just a few minutes. Time just flies, oh my gosh. To share either how that was for you, writing, how it was sharing, and any other takeaways or things that you want to have heard and seen. And Claudine.
Oh, I want to say you thank you for such a rich opportunity you gave to us. It was the deepest exercise I was given to do for a very long time. And I feel full of love and very grateful to you, Robin. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudine. Oh, Joel.
They're weird. So, wow, this was profoundly moving and opening for me. It's like I was with Rosemary, and what her sharing affected me tremendously, and I just had lots of awareness of how it's so hard for me to accept love sometimes, and sharing our memories together and hearing her read her letter to her father, it's just opened me up, and I just had these feelings of connection trickling down.
Mm. And Joel, I saw your hand. Thank you so much, Lisa, and thank you, Rosemary, for sharing through Lisa.
Thank you. This was very evocative. I was in a group with Kim and Milan, and I just want to, although I'd love to share what I heard from them, I want to say that I started trying to do a narrative like a sentences in which I would talk about this and that and the other thing, and I couldn't do it. I had to start with a mind map, with the word love in the middle, and then branching that out to what feels like love, like warmth, like generosity and kindness, and examples. And I ended up with mostly examples from my childhood, mostly or early adulthood, and mostly from members of my family, and mostly from the members of my family that I had the most difficult relationships with, of their generosity and warmth and kindness to me, which was I remember that you said that Betty had said yesterday that Carolyn was able to maintain connections with people from all phases of her life, and that Betty had remarked that that was something that she admired as a capacity. And I thought of whole sections of my life that I kind of stepped out of and deliberately broke off contact with, and then other places where connections remain strong from my childhood up until now. And that it's just a moving exercise to see all those things operating in me that I was not paying any attention to without exercise. Yesterday, I was in a conversation with some other people in PEG, and there was a reflection on the Bodhisattva vows. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. And a commentator on the Bodhisattva vow had said, this is a contradiction. How could you possibly free all living beings? And this is the way I've approached that vow from the start. It's like, okay, well, it's a contradiction, and as maybe Suzuki Roshi said, if it's not paradoxical, it can't be true, or some words to that effect. But Peg had a different take. She said, think of a doctor. A doctor takes a vow to heal people. And he can't heal everybody in the world, but he or she can heal everybody who comes to them, or make every effort to heal the people who come to them. And that's what the vows really point to, is not a to-do list, but a functional orientation, an active orientation to turn from running away from suffering to accepting love where you can find it, and to give it back.
I think maybe we're end our question.
Yeah, I just want to give a chance to anyone here in the Zendo. Thank you so much, Joel, for sharing that reflection and connecting it to the Bodhisattva vow. Does anyone here want to share anything before we close? It sounds like this was a rich opening, and I invite and encourage you to continue this practice, maybe in journaling before or after you sit, in the coming days and weeks and years, knowing that we're not ever going to keep, oh, I want to get the poem. We're not, the life well lived does not mean that every single time we're going to stop trying to outrun suffering. We will still do that. That's just being human. And we will fail to accept love, and we may sometimes fail to find it. But I think this exercise points us in a direction of emphasizing more where we are doing that, and that as a guidepost to not wasting this life. So thank you.